Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the April Focus Series. Today's topic is a practical asset map catch-up. Now, we know as financial planners, we always want to show clients that we understand them, that we understand who's important to them, what's important to them, and what they want to achieve. And we're continuously looking for ways to show value and add value by enabling and assisting clients to meet their goals. Now, in today's talk, I'm going to take us through a very simple, practical example, and I've purposefully kept it quite simple so that we can show just how you can bring in the different asset map features and practically incorporate them into your client's engagement process. Now, I know we all have our own process, so this is just an example process, but as we talk and walk through this client and this experience, please think about your client engagement process and whether you can bring some of these features in and practically incorporate them. So without further ado, let's meet the tailors. So the first feature I want to point out is you'll notice that the screen I'm sharing, it's the asset map sort of behind a white cover, and that is using our present mode feature. So I want to first just show you how we can turn that on. But what this does is it's great if you having a client engagement and you've got the asset map up on a screen, or you're having a virtual engagement like we are now, because it sort of grays it out so you don't distract the client with the map and you can, start the conversation. But it also gives a nice reveal moment where you click on this logo at the top and it shows the asset map. So just to recap how you would turn that on, if you're in asset map, you'll see this icon in the top right-hand corner here called present mode. If you click on that, it'll full screen asset map on the screen. And then if you select the asset map logo right at the top of your screen here, you'll get this white screen. And then to reveal, you simply click on the logo again. So this works really nicely in those client engagements. But let's talk a little bit about the Taylors. So here we have Jack and Susan Taylor. We don't know much about them. Again, I'm trying to keep the example quite simple, but we know that Jack's earning an income and that he has a pension fund, and together they have a son, Joe. So let's assume for this example, I've sent out the discovery link and the client has completed some of this information. It was a client that was referred to us by another client. And the reason that he wants to see us is to talk a little bit more about retirement. So I sent the discovery link, and while Jack didn't fill in a lot of information, he did give us some, being his income and his pension fund, as well as the people that are important to him. Now, you remember if you go through the discovery process, right at the end, it asks the client, what is top of mind for you? And there the client can select different priorities. Now, with the addition of priorities, everything the client selects in that top of mind section will pull through to priorities in asset maps. So the first thing I want to do is see what is everything that Jack filled in. So right here in my sidebar, I'm going to click on this icon here and open up priorities, so that I can see that Jack and Susan filled in some information here, and they told us that what's top of mind for him right now is retirement planning. Now, in this first engagement with the clients, there's a couple of things that we want to talk about. We want to unpack those priorities in more detail. We want to understand what that means for Jack and whether there are other priorities. We also want to expand what we know about their current situation. And we can, approach that in different ways. You might do the current financials first, or you might do the priorities first. It doesn't matter which one you would do depending on the clients and their circumstances. For this illustration, I'm going to start by working through the priorities. So here I'm going to open it up in the panel on the left so I can really focus in the conversation on priorities. And you'll see here on the top, when I'm open up priorities, it gives me two different tabs here, identify and importance. The first thing we want to do is work through this identify. So we know that Jack filled in retirement is top of mind for him. So here the conversation would be unpacking that. What does retirement mean for Jack? When is he thinking about retiring? What would that look like for him? What are some of the things he wants to achieve before and after? What sort of income would they need in retirement? So this gives us the opportunity to really unpack that with Jack. And I can also open up this particular priority, and I can rename it to something specific. So let's say as part of the conversation with Jack, he said, what he really wants from retirement is to retire comfortably, and let's say at age 67. So I can go ahead and put that in. So we can make it really use the words the client uses. So they can really connect with whatever the priority is. I can also put in additional notes. So anything about what retirement means for Jack, I can add in here under notes and update it. The other point I want to point out is at the bottom here, you'll see there's a list or different lists of potential priorities. And this is great because often, planners will say, when I ask a client, what are your goals or priorities? They don't know, they don't know offhand, these are the things I want to achieve. But using these drop-downs here, we can help expand the conversation. And you'll see that I can look at most common, or I can look at financial foundation, or I can look at retirement. So when a client, for example, in Discovery selects retirement planning, I can actually go into the section to prompt conversation or thought for the client around what do they mean by, preparing for retirement? Is it around tax? Is it around independence? Is it around income? And we can really unpack that with the client. But let's say through engaging with Jack, we spoke about retiring comfortably. But one of the other goals we also want to talk about is, he mentioned looking at these most common, that providing a legacy is something that he thinks about. Then I can go ahead and select it, and you see it pops up here at the top. But now I can expand on that. And perhaps providing a legacy could mean, sustaining my family's lifestyle in the event of death. It could be covering debts. It could be, I want to make sure that my kids have a good start. And that's the legacy I want to leave. So here I can again rename it based on what this client says is the most important for them. So let's say in this instance, he says, sustain lifestyle in the event of death. And then just to round out the example, I also want to talk to Jack about his son. And perhaps he mentions, actually for his son, he wants to make sure that we can assist with his engineering degree. So the son is 14 at the moment. He's going to start studying in about 4 years, and he wants to make sure that he can give him a good start or a bit of help in getting going with that. Now here I could either, select other, but a quick way of adding an additional priority is I can just click on this plus here, and I can say assist with engineering. Yep. And then I click on the little plus and it adds it in here. Okay, so there you see it adding at the top. So you can see how you can use these at the bottom to select specific priorities or create your own. But the most important is that you're creating a space for this conversation around what's important to the client. Have we got everything? This is obviously going to change over time, but what are the top priorities for now? Once we've identified that, then we can move across to importance. And this is where we want to talk through, if we've got a long list of different priorities, how do we prioritize within that? What are the top ones that we want to do first? What are some things that we could maybe do a bit later? When I flip over to importance, I can also turn the library off just to clear that out of the conversation, really focus in on the priorities here. And maybe throughout this conversation, talking, like he says, sustaining the lifestyle and death, that is my highest priority. And then perhaps it's assisting your son with the degree is next, and retiring, while it's still quite a few years out, so perhaps that's normal priority. But you can see how I can drag it around and enable that discussion with the client around how do we know which ones we want to focus on first. Okay, but let's say that's the conversation we had with Jack. These are the things that are top of mind for him and what he wants to achieve. The next step I want to do here is I want to expand this client's current position. I want to understand more about the inventory that they've built up to now, what that journey has been like, so that we can use that information with the priorities to see how on track is Jack to achieve these goals. And of course, for that, I'm going to use a stencil. Now, you can always apply a stencil by right-clicking and selecting it here, but we have now added stencils to the sidebar as well. So I can click on the stencil icon here in the sidebar, and you'll see I have my stencil list. That'll be any stencils I've created for, or you've created for your practice. They will show up here in the My Stencil list. And of course, we've got the public library. Now, the public library has a long list of different stencils for clients in the UK. So we can see here, we can look at pre-retirement, which is a household stencil. It has everything, great for data collection. It's got a bit of everything clients could have, but there's a whole range of stencils that you can use from the public library by selecting them here for things like businesses or trusts or executives, and you can apply from here. Now, if I click on this pre-retirement stencil, so I want to apply that as I want to expand this conversation with the client, you'll see that the little picture comes up. And if I click on that icon, that'll show me a preview of the stencil. So I can see before I apply it to the client, what is it going to look like when I select apply? So you can always preview them first. And you can add stencils from the public library to your personal My Stencil library. And this is great, especially because there's such a long list under the public library. You can, add the ones that you use most frequently to your My Stencil list. But also by adding it to your stencil list, it will add the household to your household index. And from there, you can really make that stencil your own. You can put in the unique financial conversations you want to have with clients. You can tailor the wording. You can also put in notes of different conversations that you want to have with the client. So if you haven't already, add your favorite stencils from the public library to your personal library and make them your own. But from here, I can then select apply. And what it's going to do now is apply that stencil to this client and open up a whole lot of boxes for me to have the conversation around what else can we gather for this client. And stencils work really well for this because, if a client sees a block with £1 in and they know they've got something in that block, they want to share it with us. So we find clients share more, but it's also a great way of opening up conversations around potential gaps by saying, clients like you typically have some of these financials in place, or it's ones that they're considering or thinking about. Can we work through this together and unpack what you have, or if there are potentially gaps? Okay. So I'm going to just jump over quickly to this next tab. So let's say we've now had that discussion with Jack and we've unpacked a little bit more around his current financial position. So working through the stencil with Jack, he mentioned, he actually does have some life cover. So we've added that in. Also bringing in the state pension. We know that that'll come into play later on in life. So we're bringing that in here. And he also mentioned that he's got some savings, there's £40,000 here, that he really wants to earmark for Joe's education. So, for that engineering degree that's starting in 4 years. He also mentioned that he's got property and a current mortgage. So we want to take that into account as well. So now in that first session, I've used Asset Map and stencils to expand what we know about the client, also gone through priorities so I know exactly what he wants to achieve now. Now I can go into that next part of the process to see, well, now that we know what you want to achieve, how on track is this client to achieve that? Obviously, there we're going to run some target maps for the different goals that Jack has, but also look at potentially different scenarios in target maps, or, looking at creating drafts for that so we can do all of that prep work. I'm not going to go through the target maps in detail, but I just want to show you here, we've now created different target maps for the priorities that Jack mentioned. So the first is sustaining the lifestyle in the event of death, then assisting Joe with his engineering degree, and retiring comfortably at age 67. So we've put the target maps in here. Now, from a conversation point of view with the client, we would be working through each of those target maps to say, have we got all the assumptions right? Are these the things that you wanted to achieve? And working through that what you want section. Benny, I'm just doing a check. You still there? Okay, sorry. It looked like it froze for a second, but
I'm mesmerized by this question.
Just checking. Okay, so we'd work through with the client under the what you want section that we understand what their needs are in each of these different target maps. And a great feature here to open up more conversation with the client is what we call target map compare. And you can use this feature for, if you're running multiple retirement scenarios for a client, what if you're saving more? What if you spend less? How does that impact the target map? But it's also great when a client has different goals like Jack has that are potentially competing in terms of what he wants to achieve. So to create target map compare, I can simply click on these little check boxes here. And you'll see as I can select up to 3. pops up at the bottom with this compare button. And when I click on that, it brings them up together on one screen. And this is great to facilitate a conversation, especially with Jack, where we're saying, okay, we want to sustain lifestyle and death. There's a bit of a gap that we need to plug there. But we also want to assist Joe with, saving for the engineering degree, and we want to start saving more towards retirement. And now this can help me have a conversation around, are we going to focus on one first? Are we going to try and progress all of them? And that would depend on the clients and your conversation. But for this example, we're going to assume we want to progress all three of them. Even if we don't get all the way to 100%, we want to take a step forward in 2006. So if I go back, but just so you can also move these around if you wanted this one in the middle, for example, or so you can move them around, and you can make some adjustments here within Target Map Compare to understand the impact of that. So you could change the return assumption to see the impact of that, or, look at what is the deficit and how would we make it up. But this is just a great space for enabling a conversation around different scenarios or multiple goals. And how do we know which ones we're going to focus on first? So for Jack, I've also created 3 more scenarios where you can see on the bottom where we've proposed specific things that we're going to do differently to progress across this bar. So we're going to take out some more life cover, save a bit more towards Joe's education, as well as save a bit more towards retirement. You'll also notice that I've named the target maps here based on the names that we wrote down for the priorities. And that's again because we want to create that connection between this is the goal, this is the target map that's showing us how we're progressing towards that goal. To rename a target map, you simply double click here on the words and you can type and edit the name. You can also move these around to put them into an order that makes sense. Specifically, if you've prioritized the different priorities in an order, you want to keep that throughout and do that here on the target maps as well. But now that we've had that conversation with Jack, I want to show you how Sidebar can really become a powerful conversation with the client around summarizing everything, that full end-to-end process, and doing it on one screen so that we're not jumping around from one screen to another, which could be overwhelming. But how can we bring it all together here using the sidebar? So first, I can click on priorities and say to Jack, let's just check in again. What are the things we said we wanted to achieve? On high priority, we said sustain the lifestyle in the event of death and assist Joe with his engineering degree. Under normal, we said retire comfortably at age 67. Now, a key point here on priorities, if I open up one of them, if this was complete, I can always tick this resolved at the bottom. And what that does is it moves it from up here down to resolved. And that's great as we check in with Jack over time to say, look at the things we've done already. These are the things we've marked off as resolved. So the first thing I want to do is check in on priorities. You can see how I'm doing it on one screen, not moving away, and just showing that connection for Jack between his current picture and how it's assisting in these goals. I can also then go into target maps right here on the sidebar and show the client, these are the financials, we have our current position, and here we can see how on track we are to sustain that lifestyle in the event of death, to assist Joe with his engineering, to retire comfortably at 67. And then one of my favorite features is this little eye here, because when I click on that eye for the retirement, for example, it's going to gray out the whole map and just highlights the financials that have been included in that target map so that I can make that connection for the client between what I've built up so far, but how are those things actually helping me achieve the priorities or the goals that I want to achieve? So I can, if I do it on the engineering, you can see it's going to highlight that savings fund. It's also a great way of picking up if there's something that hasn't been allocated or has been allocated to the wrong goal. It's a great way of showing that. But I just think it's a really powerful because we say to clients, they want to understand where am I today? How on track am I? And how can I progress forward? But just providing that connection between why do I have this life cover or why do I have this savings fund? Well, let's just reiterate, this is what it's helping us achieve. And you'll also see when you've got a whole lot of target maps like we have here, you can select this little target button here. And you could have a whole lot of target maps because you've explored multiple different scenarios and then decided on a specific one. This is the one that we're going to take forward. Then you can go ahead and click on this little tick box, select as target. And what that does is it just allows me to filter here at the top. So I can look at all target maps, or I can look at just the targeted ones. So I can again say to Jack, while we looked at all these options, your current, these are the things we're going to do. This is what we're targeting. These are the steps that we are going to be taking. Another great way of summarizing it for the client is using drafts. I know in our last webinar, we went through, creating drafts in more detail, but it's again, being able to select it here in the sidebar and show the client, what do we mean? We agreed to do certain things, take out more life cover. We agreed to, save more for retirement and save more towards Joe's education. But sometimes clients don't really know, what is that going to change, or what does that really mean? And using a draft is a great way of summarizing that and also ensuring that the client understands it. So here, if I click on drafts, I've created a draft here, and you can see it highlights the changes that we are proposing. So we're looking at adding more life cover. What does that mean? We can have another block here that is going to have, life cover with the provider. We're talking about saving an additional X amount into that savings fund for Joe. We're talking about adding more to our pension pot, so saving more each month towards our pension. What is that going to cost us? So I like to add these as expenses here, especially just in the draft, so that you can open up a conversation around affordability. Is that the right time? Can we do all of that now? What is that actually going to look like? But you can see how by using the draft, I'm just making it really real for the clients and tangible. These are the steps that we're wanting to implement. Yeah, that's that up there. And then the last step in the process with Jack is to share this with him now. So we've gone through, what your priorities are. We've gone through what your current financial picture looks like. We've run the different target maps to see how on track you are. We've proposed changes to that. We've shown the draft of what that's going to look like. And the last step is then how do we take that next step? And that could be, sharing a report with Jack, generating reports and emailing it. Or it could be sharing client portal access with Jack. So I want to show you again how you can do it straight here in the meeting with Jack using the sidebar. I can click on Jack here in the middle of the page, and it pops up on the right, and I navigate to this client portal tab here. When I open that up, it's going to ask 2 questions. Do I want Jack to register with a specific email address or not? So I can tick that and put in the email. And what do I want Jack to be able to see? Now here we've got the default permission sets, but I've also created a few of my own. So I can say, actually, we're at this step. I want to add this permission set, for example. And here below, I can see, well, what will that give Jack access to? He'll have access to the asset map reports to print or suggest changes and shared reports. So now I can position with Jack. I'm going to create a report. I'm going to share it to the client portal. We've created this client portal link now. So I'm going to share this link with you. You're going to click on that link. It's going to ask you to verify your email and create your own password. But from that point onwards, you can log on to the client portal at any time. You can review any of the reports I've shared with you, go back to older reports, and you can suggest changes to your picture as and when things change in your life. Even that for this client, it includes expanding the conversation to the spouse. I can also preview it here. So I can click on this little preview so that I can show Jack in the meeting what it will look like when he logs into the client portal. How would he navigate to the shared reports to get the reports that he needs, but then also how can we update and make changes over time? Right. So as we close out for today, I think about whether it's priorities or whether it's target map compare or creating your own stencils. Think about what are some of these features that you can practically incorporate into your client's engagement process. Thank you, Benny.
Thanks, Chris.